So if you've seen the news lately, if you listen to the radio, if you picked up the newspaper, you see a lot of things happening throughout the country. You see things that are unsettling, things that seem to be scary to a lot of people, including me. And so there's nothing wrong with having scary things. We see the destruction of our country, the destruction of our cities, destruction of normalcy, and they're telling us get ready for the new normal. Not just in the idea of Antifa, Black Lives Matter, causing their chaos in major cities throughout the country. As you well know, some of them even came out here and had a picnic at Zinc. I'm not sure what that was all about. But anyway, they threatened us and they ended up having a picnic. But these are scary times for people to live in. It's unsettling. You wonder, what kind of future are we going to have? What kind of future are our children going to have? And it's certainly uncertain times, and we wonder what's going to happen next. What's going to happen? What's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen next week? What's going to happen after the election? What's going to happen with the inauguration? What's going to happen if Trump loses? What's going to happen if Trump wins? What's going to happen? And we don't know. It's much like you're on a tightrope. And I mentioned the tightrope for a reason. You see in a second. Much like being on a tightrope, and you're on the tightrope, and you know you got to keep your balance, because if you don't keep your balance, what happens? If you don't keep your balance, you're going to plunge to the ground. And if you don't have a safety net, then you take the possibility of severe injury, or perhaps even the loss of your life. Now, a few years ago, and you may still hear about him a little bit in the news, because Nick Wallenda is kind of the carries on tradition of a family that started by Karl Wallenda in Germany. He was born in Magdeburg, Germany in 1905. When he was 17 years old, he started his own, I'm going to say acrobat, but that's not quite right. But, tightrope walking and up aerial acrobats and that sort of thing. And he started his own team of, because he started learning that when he was just a child. He started his own troupe, as they call it, when he was 17 years old, called the Great Wallendas. And they toured throughout Europe, eventually picked up by the Barnum and Bailey Circus, I believe. They performed for them for many years. And in 1940, in Akron, Ohio, there was an accident, and most, if not all of them, fell off the wire. Miraculously, none of them were injured severely, and a reporter who was there witnessed the event said that the Wallendas fell so gracefully that it seemed as if they were flying. And so the Great Wallendas at that time became known as the Flying Wallendas, and they became very famous during their day. All right. In 1962, however, they did a performance in Detroit, Michigan. I was living in Detroit, Michigan at the time, and I saved this headline newspaper from that time. I still have it. Death at the Circus. In 1962, they fell and collapsed, and several of the Wallendas died in the collapse, and it made national news. And here's from the Detroit News from 1962. And but that's kind of how we can feel here. The way I feel, I'm telling you how I look at it. You may look at it differently, but that's how we can see how our civilization, what's happening to our society, what's happening to the civilization, our just routine that we have that we grow accustomed to. This routine we have, going here and going there, and going to the store, and coming home, having dinner, and just a peaceful routine. Suddenly it seems all up in the air, like a balancing act. Are we going to collapse to the ground? Is our whole society like the Wallendas, about ready to collapse and plunge to the ground? And are we going to face this sudden death, as several of those people, the Wallendas, did? Karl Wallenda, who actually started the Flying Wallendas, he actually, at 73 years old, in Rio de Janeiro, I guess it's the time you probably should not try to walk the tightrope, because at 73 years old, he actually fell off the tightrope and plunged to death in Rio de Janeiro. So we are, in a sense, on a tightrope in our society today. And We feel this explosive non-white population around it. And now, maybe younger people don't feel it the same way. I don't know. But someone who has any age to them at all, they feel this explosive non-white population that just came out of nowhere, it seems like. And it exploded in our midst and altered everything in our society. Everything from our politics to our morals to our values to everything, our education, everything, our history. Everything is being changed and uprooted. And just like that man falling off that tightrope would have experienced. And our nation is now in this giant moral freefall. And we wonder what's going to happen. We witnessed the Black Lives Matter. We witnessed Antifa. Even in Harrison here, Jeff Crockett, who used to be our mayor, he's got billboards around town promoting Black Lives Matter. And this is the guy that wants to run for mayor again of Harrison. We wonder. And so a lot of people, because of our concern, because of their concern, they feel we got to do something. We got to do something. And because any moment, civilization is going to just fall on us and collapse. And so what do? And they want to prepare. They want to prepare some survival things. They want to prepare food. They want to prepare guns and ammo. They should do all those things. I'm not saying you shouldn't. You should do all those things. But what, as Christians, what do we do in the midst of this chaos? There's this terrible dilemma that we're facing. And we never know what's going to happen in the very next day. And so there's a lot of people, they call them preppers, and they prepare for the coming collapse. And they have the attitude, well, to the other people who are not listening, to the world who don't listen, who are not preparing, who are not prepping, who are not storing away food, who are not storing away guns and ammo, who are not storing away medicine. They look upon them and say, don't come to me when the collapse comes, because you made your bed, you lay in it. And that is the attitude they have. I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong. That's not necessarily a wrong attitude, because God certainly sends judgment upon people. And if they don't prepare and don't listen to the words of warning from those who have warned them, and the Old Testament prophets have warned the people, they don't heed the word of warning, they get the judgment. So I'm not saying the attitude is necessarily wrong, but that attitude doesn't alter our responsibility any. Our responsibility is just like those prophets, send warning to the people. The prophets of old, they warned the nation, they just didn't ignore themselves. They understood that the prophet warning was coming, judgment was coming, and they felt the responsibility to warn the nation. Whether the nation would listen to them or not, they still had that responsibility. And I've seen people over the years, because I've been involved in this, as you well know, for many, 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 many years, and I have seen people who have prepared and stored away food in barrels into the ground, thinking with any day, any week, any month, they're going to retrieve those things, and now they're old. And one fellow told me, he said, I'm not even sure where all the barrels are at anymore. He told me that just a few months ago. Somebody who's still alive, I know. He said, I'm not even sure where I put those barrels anymore. Because he'll bury these barrels back in the 1960s. And so I've seen people prepare. And they should. People should be prepared. People should not have a callous attitude saying, well, whatever happens, happens. We have a responsibility to prepare. And when we see what's happening in our country, it does seem imminent dangers upon each and every one of us. It does seem that way. And it does seem like it could come very quickly. And it does seem like it could come tomorrow. And what do we do? What do we do in light of all that? And like I said, I've seen many people, I could name others, who spent vast amount of time, vast amount of money, not caring about the world as such, not caring about our people, not really caring about the nation, just focused on what they can do for themselves to prepare themselves for survival. I believe I have a verse on the screen. No man that warreth entangleth himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who hath chosen him to be a soldier. Now the key word that I see in that passage is the word entangleth. 2 Timothy 2:4. And no man that warreth entangleth himself with the affairs of this life. Now it doesn't mean you're not going to be entangled, because we are entangled, because we all have responsibilities of jobs, carrying out daily activities, life, friendship, food preparation, all the things that we have to do in our daily life. So we are entangled with the world in that regard. But the word here, what we're being warned here, don't become entangled to the point that you neglect what your responsibility as a soldier of the cross is. Don't make sure your priority, that you don't become, because those guys in that tightrope, they had to stay focused. They had to stay focused what they're doing. They had to know where they're going to put the next step. And I don't know if they looked down or not. I've been told you're not supposed to look down. But the point is, Nick Wallenda crossed the Niagara Falls from Canada, from the United States to Canada in 1992 or 97, something like that. And he walked on a 2-inch wire, I don't think I'll do that, but you have to stay focused. And we have to stay focused on what's happening here in our nation today. So we have all these things that are going on in our life we have to take care of, we have to do, but don't let them sidetrack us from what the responsibility as a soldier of Christ is to do. Because these things that are happening, what we see happening is really judgment. It's really judgment from God. It's judgment upon a nation that has not been willing to submit itself to his authority. And I know we had a prayer march in Washington, D.C. yesterday by Franklin Graham. There were thousands and thousands of people there. And I don't want to be a cynic, sound like a cynic. And so I may not explain myself properly. If I don't, excuse me. But I saw these people, and they're repenting. And I'm thinking to myself, what are they repenting of? What are they repenting? We repent, but what are we repenting of? Well, as we could develop here in length, the rest of the sermon, which we're not going to be able to, the two sins that Christ told us to be careful for, to watch out for in the last days were what? Well, what? He says it was the days of Sodom, which was homosexuality, and the days there's a lot, which is homosexuality, as the days of Noah, which was mass race mixing. But we are in a judgment. And this judgment that we're facing causes what Luke 21:26 says, men's heart failing them for fear. Men's heart failing them for fear. There's this fear that had engulfed many people throughout the country. And they're not sure how to respond to it, this fear of what's happening. Because we live in uncertain times. We certainly do. We live in uncertain times. And yet we have to understand that God not only has guidance for our nation, but he also has guidance for our lives, for our personal lives, and because we're involved in the nation, we're involved in the affairs of the nation, we're involved in the affairs of this century, of this day and age which we live in. We're involved in this period of time. We weren't born in 1860, 1760, 1560. We're born right now. This is when we live. And so he has instructions for the nation. He has instructions for ourselves, or individuals. We read in Proverbs 3:5, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. The key word there is our own understanding. Lean not unto your own understanding, because we do that. We all do that. We try to figure this out for ourselves. We try to figure out what's going on. We try to figure out, we look at the nation, the world, we try to figure out what's going on. And so often we lose balance. We allow fear to dictate us. We lose balance. Or we decide we got to prepare, do prepping, and we lose balance. We lose balance. And fear engulfs the lives of people today. Suicide is going out of the roof, as I understand. People are fearful. And the suicide rate primarily is among young white men between ages of 20 and 40, I understand. It's sad. But 2 Timothy 1:7, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. And the word sound there, the word sound is from the Greek word sophroismos. Sophroismos. And it means, the sound mind means to have a self-controlled mind. To be self-disciplined. Your mind is disciplined. It's not going to waver to the right. It's not going to waver to the left. It's going to stay focused on your responsibility. It's focused on not being entangled in the world. We're focused on being a good soldier that Paul talked about. It's being a sound mind, discipline. One translation actually says, for God did not give us a spirit of fear or of timidity, but a spirit of power and love and self-discipline. So we're told not to have the spirit of fear. It doesn't say not to be fearful. There's nothing wrong with being fearful, because fear would cause you to prepare. Fear would cause you to turn to the Lord. Fear is what calls you drive to repentance. So there's nothing itself wrong with fear, but he said don't be controlled by the spirit of fear. And there's a difference. The spirit of fear will destroy us. And he said don't be destroyed or controlled by the spirit of fear. And Paul said, or David said, well, I'm afraid I will trust in you. And he also said, I sought the Lord, he answered me, and he delivered me from all my fears. So fear is a good thing. It helps us, a phrase I like to use sometimes, somewhat jokingly, but somewhat truthfully. Paranoid people live longer. So there's nothing wrong with it. Have a little bit of fear. Nothing wrong with that. Just don't let it control you. Now, in these chaotic times of rioting and looting and Antifa and Black Lives Matter, fear is gripping the hearts of people. And they're not sure what's going to happen. Franklin Graham, the other day in an interview, who held this deal yesterday, son of Billy Graham, he said, I'm fearful. He said, I'm not fearful for myself so much. He said, I'm 68 years old. But I'm fearful, he said, in a few years, what kind of future is my children and my grandchildren going to have? What should we do? Should we focus on this preparation, on this survival? Should we just focus on, forget about the world, just ensure you get your food stored away, the ammunition stored away, and so on? You should focus on those things. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of keeping this balance. Let me show you some things, however. All these things I have in my library. That's a book called Prepare for War. It tells, the concept of the book, I just got the cover of there. The concept is basically telling you we have a matter of just months away until the collapse is going to come. We need to prepare, get your survival, get everything lined up because it's coming. That book that tells us. This book was written in 1981, 35 years ago, before some of you were born. In 1972, I spoke at a church in Missouri, very church that some of these people are going to next week, Pastor Gaiman. And I spoke sort of much on the same issue I'm talking about today, is that the enemy is very good at patching things together. When we see something about ready to collapse, the enemy is very good at patching it together and making it last a little bit longer. And I said, this collapse, it may come, but it could be years away. We don't know. And I remember, and Muriel was there, I remember this, and this gentleman is still alive. I'm not going to say his name. He's been here a few times over the years. But I remember him coming to me after in the cafeteria, which is a different location than the cafeteria is now. He told me, he said, Tom, and he kind of said it from some other people. He said, I want you to know, of course, he was quite a bit older than me, 20 years maybe, 25. He said, I want you to know, he said, this thing is not going to last as long as you said. This thing, if it lasts 6 months, I'll be surprised. That was in 1972, 41 years ago. We have to be well knowledgeable, have to be prepared, but we can't lose focus. That's a publication called National Forecast. Let me see if I got something with the portion where they write here. They, referring to the Russians, are expecting the American economy to crash. They also anticipate social chaos to result from the tragic enforcement of integration in our school system caused by the federal government's unconstitutional infringement in the field of states' rights. The whole world is rushing toward bankruptcy. Moscow plans, when the process is well on, to move in for the kill and to take over. Surely civilization has never been in a more precarious position. That was written in 1966, 50 years ago. Here is a publication. Pardon me, but here's what he wrote in 1969. How many years ago is that? 30, 40, 51 years ago. 1969. Let's face it, I am hesitant about advising you on how to spend your money and make the necessary preparations for what I believe will be serious riots with accompanying terror, financial upheaval, famine, and martial law in the near future. You fully understand that the communist plans are to bring about street revolutions for the creation of chaos and terror. You read about it in China, Algeria, and Cuba. You saw it in Detroit, Los Angeles, and Newark. The techniques work in all environments and all ethnic and religious groupings. You have seen part of that in the riots held in several hundred U.S. cities by financing the Marxist revolutionaries. Let me tell you something. In the 1960s, because my wife and I were involved in this movement then, we thought this thing was going to be over with very shortly. We thought the collapse was coming very soon. We thought it may be months away. We couldn't imagine it getting any worse. Of course, it did. We couldn't imagine it. Nobody else could either. We were advised not to have any children. We were told that it's almost certain. Older people told us it's almost certain that you have to flee the cities, survive in the outback, and crying babies will put you and those with you in danger. That was in 1969, 1970 is what we're told then. It's 50 years ago. Will you be free in 1973? It was a publication put out in 1965. People are terrified. People start to prepare. People start storing massive amount of foods and grains and so forth to prepare for the coming collapse. Will Russia invade America? They were written in 1960. And the book basically says yes, and soon. Here's something I have in my library. This is also from the publication National Forecast I showed a moment ago. Is the American system of government with its checks and balances now on the way out? Questionably, military maneuvers are astir in our nation, which are causing considerable apprehension among the citizenry as to just what is developing. Both the water moccasin and swift strike operations have of late provoked anxieties in the southeastern states as to what is behind the enormous but quiet exercise. On the surface and ostensibly, they purport to be just routine training. However, a deeper scrutiny into the massive buildup of military forces is beginning to reveal some stubborn facts difficult to fully comprehend unless we know from the Scriptures what is the offense for our time. Among many honest and inquiring minds, questions are rising as to who represents the 16 nations supposed to be present for these gigantic military operations, and why should so much secrecy be necessary? One high authority at the Pentagon, when questioned, stated that there were only 600 soldiers participating in these exercises, and there was nothing to be alarmed about. However, upon investigation, one authority reports that there are many times that number involved. Furthermore, if they are so insignificant, why must they require 2,500 square miles and 1.5 million acres of land to exercise their maneuvers. Why is this news being kept out of the normal American news media? Why are high government agencies so bent upon concealing the plain facts of the case that they must indulge in falsehoods to answer any inquiries? It could be possible that these activities are rehearsals for the United Nations Army and are now engaged in conditioning America to take over our nation. Are they here to confiscate land from private owners and intimidate them to accept invasion troops so as having more authority than their own officials? This was written in 1962, 58 years ago. I also have, in 1997, I was given a paper by a friend of mine who died a few years ago, but he was a good friend of mine, although I didn't necessarily agree with everything, of course. The paper said this. It was in the spring of 1997. It contained these words. In July of 1997, the state of Arizona will declare martial law. 26 major cities will have poison dumped into their drinking water. It was stated as a fact. In 1975, a rumor circulated about the bicentennial that was approaching, would be 1976. And it said a Negro Revolution followed by a missile attack would occur by the Soviet Union. I was given that paper at one of the little theaters there at North Arkansas Community College. We were having a showing of Birth of a Nation. And we invited, I think even advertised it in the Harrison Times. And we had probably 75, 800 people there. And this guy attended, and he gave me this paper. Here's another one. This is from December of 1985. This is 35 years ago. This is very important. I have had recent contact with a person who's in touch with officials at the National Security Council, the Pentagon, and the Federal Emergency Management Administration. This person reports that these government officials expect a nuclear attack upon the United States by the Soviet Union in the near future. This will probably be by the coming Christmas holiday or soon thereafter. This is 1985, remember. 2 reasons for this is expected. The Soviets have spent huge amount of money on military buildup in a short period of time. This buildup has not been identified by the U.S. government. The other most important reason is on June 3, 1985, 9 Soviet submarines carrying nuclear multiple warheads missiles made a dry run of an attack on our east coast. What was not known by our government officials at that time was that at the same time, there's 14 Soviet submarines off the west coast. Then he writes, "Do not panic. I believe this information is valid." Don't panic. He tells us we're all going to be blown to bits and be fried by nuclear explosion over the holidays. Then he says, don't panic. One night in the early 1990s, when I was out of town speaking, Muriel, right over here, got a phone call from a friend of ours, and the reason for the call was urgent. Here's what he said. "Muriel, get the kids some food and get to Morgan Cave as fast as you can. It's going down tonight." That's what she was told. Now, fortunately, Muriel was a sound, disciplined, and self-controlled mind. Here's a book called We Will Survive. That's the front cover of it. That's the book itself right there. We Will Survive. It was written by a husband and wife team, Art and Kay Westerman. The couple was extremely concerned about the direction of this country. The country was unraveling and would soon face economic collapse and racial upheaval. It was written in the early 1960s. The book covers everything from food storage, living off the land, weapons, and communications if a civil war occurred. The Westerman suggests, quote, "Withdraw any funds you may have in the bank or other agency. Cash out what you can. Convert that money to silver, food, and weapons for self-protection. If you are in a position to get a new or other car, get a Jeep or a Scout or truck type, like a Power Wagon or other type of four-wheel vehicle. Keep camouflage paint, tarp, or netting in it at all times." The message of the Westermans was clear. Survival skills would be needed soon. That was 57 years ago. It's been a few years now, but 10, 12 years ago, I was told that Red Chinese troops were being stationed south of our border. I don't know if they're there or not, but I do know they would be very, very old if they are, because I first heard that story back about 1963. Now, I'm not being a scoffer. I'm not being a scoffer. Were all these warnings wrong? Were all these people wrong? No, they weren't wrong. Everything they said was absolutely right. They just didn't, the timing is, we as a people just don't understand timing, that's all. We don't understand what's going on. We can't control what the enemy does. We don't know what God's timing is. So the idea of be prepared, be warned, is good and valid information. So I'm not scoffing at them. It was very important that these people were being motivated by a very righteous reason of warning and preparing people. What we have to understand, though, we can't lose our balance. We can't lose our balance. What of warning the people about what's coming, our own self-preparation, we can't lose that balance. We can't be so concentrated, focused on preparing for ourselves, our own survival, that forget our responsibility of being a light to the nation, a warning to the nation. I know there is a move to destroy our sovereignty. I'm quite aware of that. I know there is hatred for our people. I'm quite aware of that. I know the enemy would like to round us all up and put us into camps. Trust me, Miro and I have spent the greater portion of our lives attempting to warn people of that very thing. Yes, prepare to the best of your ability, but keep your balance. Don't fall off the wire. The central focus of the Christian is not to be prepared to hide from the enemy. The central focus of the Christian is make the enemy prepared to hide from us. What is that song we sing? Hell's foundations quiver at the shout of praise, from soldiers from the Onward Christian Soldiers song. Hell's foundation quiver at the shout of praise. Our purpose is to advance the message of white Christian revival. That's our purpose. Our purpose, we're not called to see how much food we can put away. We need to do those things. It's important to do those things. But that's not our purpose. Our purpose is to be a light to the nation. And I've seen too many people over the years who become aware of these things happening and things very imminent. And they grow old and they die, and their food they stored away is rotting in the ground somewhere. There's nothing wrong with preparing. But our focus, our responsibility, is to reach out to our nation. Jesus commanded us in Luke 19, he says, occupy till I come. The word occupy means to continue in your business. It doesn't mean to shut down your life, but to continue your life. It means to expand your life. Because when you expand your life, you expand your influence. And when you expand your influence, you expand your dominion. And that was the mandate of God's people, the dominion. You don't acquire dominion by pulling the covers over you and hiding in the ground. Preparing is fine. I'm not against that. But our responsibility is not to prepare to survive. Our responsibility is to prepare to conquer and overcome. That's our responsibility. Christ tells us the gates of hell will not prevail against the kingdom. So sure, hard times are coming. Are they going to come now? I don't know. Or somewhere 40 years from now, somebody will say, back in 2020, we thought that was the end. And here we are, still going on. Because the enemy can patch this together. The enemy can patch it together. Don't think they can't. They've done it before. They can do it again. We don't know what's going to happen. But we do know that in all our preparations, which we should do, is our responsibility. In all our preparations, we can't lose focus. We can't lose our balance. We can't fall off the wire. We got to stay focused on our responsibility to warn our nation for what? Repentance. To love their people and to love their God. That's our responsibility. We see turmoil in the news every day. Yes, we see it. All the warnings that were given to us in the past by R.D.K. Westerman and by all these other people, they weren't wrong. They weren't wrong. You just couldn't imagine things getting worse. We couldn't. We couldn't. I remember in the 60s, when we moved out here to Arkansas from Arizona, we thought we were coming here to burrow down. We thought we were coming here to burrow down in the hills of Arkansas. And here we are, 50 years later. Where will we be in 50 years from now? I don't know. I know all the signs of times and all that sort of stuff, but you and I don't have, God doesn't counsel with you and me. I'm sorry to tell you that. He doesn't take counsel with us. The only thing our responsibility to have is prepare to the best of our ability. We're called to do that. I understand that. But don't make that being that prepper your main focus. Your main focus is to be a witness. Your main focus is to be a light. Your main focus is not to survive, but your main focus is to be a light to our people and to our nation. All these things we read about in the past, all these things, at that time they thought it was coming to an end, and it didn't come. And life went on. I'm not scoffing at them. I honor and respect their attempt to warn our nation. But it's our response to that warning. Do we just take it all in and decide we're going to hide? We understand that we have a responsibility to take a message of hope and deliverance to our nation. Our Father, we thank you for this day and your blessings and watch care over each and every one of us. Help us to understand the great responsibility we have. The responsibility we have to be a voice to our nation, a voice to our people. People that are lost and bewildered and don't know what direction they're going, what direction the country is going. Many of them just look back away, oh, they're going to get raptured away into heaven someday, and so they're going to not worry about it. They feel they're just going to put thousands of pounds of food away and they'll survive the storm. But help us to know that our strength is in the Lord. Our strength is in you. May we faithfully walk with you. Prepare our hearts and our minds. Help us be overcomers. In your name we ask it, amen.
Like these.